Hello, dear everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to Astronomy International Astro Week Lecture Series 2024. Today we have a very special guest. In fact, we are going to talking about astrobiology and NASA search for life in the universe with our very glorious scientist. Let me give you a very quick bio about today's our guest speaker. He's an astronomer at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., where he managed NASA research program in outer solar system. Up to now, he published over 40 international research articles in scientific journals, and he has dived through the rings of Saturn and Jupiter. Furthermore, today's our guest speaker is researching about the planet and star formation for understanding astrobiology and the origin of the life. This gentleman was a member of the NASA New Horizons mission, and it was involved in historical encounters with the Pluto in 2015 and Arrokoth in 2019. He received PhD in planetary science from University of Colorado in 2000. This scientist has spent much more his career to bring astronomy to developed world. While he living for more than a decade in Africa, India, Sri Lanka, Morocco, he worked extensively with the schools and the communities groups to help in develop their science program and inspiring next generation people of the leaders. You know, he presented more than 150 lectures for the science festival, a planetarium, schools, groups, public events across the world. This philosopher has been featured in Science, Nature, New York Times, on Historical Channel, National Geographic TV, as well as dozens of the newspapers. He has been awarded the American Astronomical Society's Carl Sagan Medal and the American Foreign Service Association Avis Bolin Award for his work in science community and outreach to the public. Asteroid 193736 Henry Tropsch is named in his honor. Now you can imagine how amazing and tremendous guest speaker that we have on today. With that being said, I would like to invite most talented, most glorious scientist, Dr. Henry Tropsch, to address Astronomy INC International Research Platform. Dr. Henry, it's your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Aravinda. Thank you, everyone, for the warm welcome and for attending this really special lecture. It's such an honor for me to come and talk with you, and I've been really looking forward to joining this lecture series and being able to talk about some of the things that I work for NASA. NASA is the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and it is the world's first space agency. And it's the world's largest space agency. And so it's the US government's space agency. And it was founded in 1958, so it's over 60 years old. NASA has worked on all sorts of different projects. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about a couple of them here. First of all, we have the Hubble Space Telescope. I think a lot of you recognize the Hubble Space Telescope. It's the first large space telescope that was in space. It's still up there. It has a beautiful mirror that's 2.5 meters across, one of the largest mirrors that we have in space. And for more than 30 years, it has been revolutionizing astronomy done from space. And so there's been hundreds of beautiful images that you've seen, including this is one of the first famous ones. This is from the Eagle Nebula. And so the reason why we do a telescope up in space, Hubble is not the largest telescope in the world, but it's above the Earth's atmosphere. And that means that you don't have light pollution, but more importantly, you don't have distortion from the atmosphere. So the light doesn't have to even go through the atmosphere at all. So you can see things more clearly and you can see things more sharply than you could on Earth. So Hubble is joined by was a joint production of NASA and the ESA, which is the European Space Agency, because some things like Hubble are so big, it takes a lot of countries working together to do them. Now, you may have also heard about the JWST, the James Webb Space Telescope. This is an even bigger space telescope. It's brand new. It was just put up 3 years ago in December of 2021. And in fact, it launched over Sri Lanka. So my friend Gayana Gunasakara, he watched it from Tengal He could see it from the beach as it was going overhead. It went across Sri Lanka and then up into the orbital position where it is. Now, the thing which is really neat about James Webb Space Telescope is it's huge. It's even bigger than Hubble Space Telescope, and it looks at different wavelengths. It looks further into what we call the infrared, and that lets us see kind of through the dust. It lets us peel back and see further and see longer than we could with something like Hubble. Plus, it's a bigger mirror, and it's higher magnification, and it's more sensitive, and it's 30 years newer. So it's an amazing telescope. It took so much work to put it together because it's so big. You know, you can see the mirror in the middle there, and that was folded up. It had to fold up inside the rocket to fit inside because it's even bigger than the rocket. And then down below it, you can see what looks kind of like an umbrella. And you know, if you're outside, sometimes if it's outside in Sri Lanka, you're walking around and it's really hot, you use an umbrella to keep yourself cool. Well, this telescope uses an umbrella to keep itself cool too. In fact, you can, because it's looking for the heat from these stars, the infrared light from the stars. And so it needs to block all of the heat coming from the sun and coming from the Earth, coming from the other planets, so that it can see the very faint heat coming from the stars. You can see one of the images there, one of the early images taken of a galaxy, and you can see kind of looks like a skeleton of a galaxy because you're able to see through the dust and see the stars and the structure below it in ways that no other telescope could do. We have the Mars rovers. We have 5 Mars rovers that NASA has sent up. This is the Curiosity rover right there. It's one of 2 which is driving around the surface on Mars right now. And these Mars rovers together have driven dozens of kilometers across the surface of Mars, exploring its history, its chemistry, and its habitability in unprecedented detail. You can see the rocks on the surface of Mars. You can see the dust on the surface of Mars. In fact, I have a little bit of a sample. This is kind of a sample of the surface of Mars. Now, this is not the real sample, but this is a bit of Mars dust, which is made on Earth from Sri Lanka by Dr. Aravinda and his colleagues. And so dust like this is actually used on Earth to test the Mars rovers and to make sure that they can drive through the surface and across the rocks on Earth. Because I'm a scientist, but there are so many engineers. It takes scientists and engineers and many other people working together to build things like these Mars rovers. One of the missions which I was involved with is the New Horizons mission to Pluto. So this is a NASA spacecraft which went out to Pluto. Pluto is the largest body in the outer solar system, the 9th planet, to many people call it. It's 6 billion kilometers out to Pluto. This is the first time ever that we went out to Pluto. Now, there were not people on this. This is like all of our other spacecraft that I've shown you. This is a robotic spacecraft. There's no people on it because it's 6 billion kilometers. It takes 9 years to get out there, and so there's no way that people would be very cranky at the end because you don't want to take along food and water, and bathrooms, and so forth for the people. So this is a robotic spacecraft. It takes pictures of the surface of Pluto and then it sends them back over a radio link. In fact, it's kind of like a mobile phone where it has a camera and a battery and a radio, and it takes pictures and then it hits send to send them back to the Earth where they're studied. So this picture here was taken by the New Horizons mission. Even with Hubble, the best picture that we could see of Pluto was about 1 pixel across from Hubble. But with the New Horizons mission, we saw a picture which is about 5,000 pixels by 5,000 pixels, 25 million pixels across, so much higher resolution, and it's really revolutionized what we know about Pluto. Here's another exciting mission. This is the Parker Solar Probe. This is a probe that comes very, very close to the sun. So the sun is super important. All of the light and heat and energy, almost all of those that we use on the Earth come ultimately from the sun. So if you turn the sun off, then it would be cold and dark on Earth. So we're really interested in studying the sun. And the Parker Solar Probe is the best spacecraft yet to study some aspects of the sun. So it's looking at the solar wind coming off from the sun. It's looking at the plasma that's coming off from the sun and so forth. And so this is, it's not landing on the sun. It's not taking exactly a sample of the sun, but it's as close to the sun as any spacecraft that we sent before. And again, this is a collaboration with ESA, which is the European Space Agency, because some of these missions are so big It takes a lot of people working together. Maybe the most famous thing that NASA has done is sending astronauts to the moon. We have the Apollo missions in 1969, and we sent missions up to the moon in 1969, 70, 71, 72, and then we took a break as we moved to robotic exploration. But the U.S. is going back to the moon with the Artemis missions. In about 2026 or 2027, we're going to send humans back to the moon. We're going to send 4 astronauts. There, you can see them right there, including the first woman to walk on the moon and the first person of color to walk on the moon. And so NASA is working on this right now. We have a new rocket that we're developing. It's called the SLS, the Space Launch System. And you can see a picture of it on a test flight right there. It's super exciting. And, this is, it's different going to the moon because we do take humans to the moon. All of our other space exploration that I showed you is using robotic exploration. But sometimes for some things which are close, we want to send humans to the moon because we have a human connection to them. And so that's why we're sending humans to the moon. NASA has hundreds and hundreds of other projects. You can see a couple of them right here. NASA studies not only the solar system, not only the sun. NASA has many missions to study the Earth, to study the moon, even to study airplanes on the Earth, and then out beyond to study the solar system, to study the galaxy, and to study the universe. So if you go to the NASA website, nasa.gov, then you can learn about many of the other projects which NASA has run over the course of the last 60 years. And it's a great place to learn about the projects that NASA has done. NASA's vision is this: we reach for new heights and reveal the unknown for the benefit of humankind. So NASA is not a company. NASA is a part of the US government. NASA doesn't make money. In fact, NASA spends money. NASA spends money for the benefit of people across the world. And so one of the things which I love about NASA is that NASA's job is to explore the universe and give away the results to everyone on Earth. And so it's not just Americans who can use the results of NASA, it's everybody. And so all of you on this call, you can all go to NASA's websites and you can download all of the data from the Hubble Space Telescope. Every single piece of data that the scientists have access to, you can have access to as well. All of the images from the James Webb Space Telescope, all of the movies from the Mars rovers, all of the samples that have, results of the samples that have been taken from the moon and from asteroids and so forth. You can study those and download those just like scientists can. And people from Sri Lanka can do that. People from India can do that. People from Poland can do that. Anywhere around the Earth, because we want to share all of the results that NASA has produced with everyone in the world. NASA collaborates with dozens of other space agencies across the world. Many science projects are just too big for one country to do alone, and they can only be done with international cooperation. And this international cooperation is so important, and that's why I'm talking with you here right now in Sri Lanka, is because this international cooperation is so important. Now, there's no Sri Lankan space agency yet. I'm sure there will be in the future, and when there is, I'm sure that NASA will be looking forward to partnering with the Sri Lankan Space Agency to work together exploring the universe. So I am not an astronaut. I've never been in space. I am an astronomer, and so I use telescopes and I use spacecraft to study the planets and the solar system around us. I use computers a lot. I do a lot of coding. I do a lot of analyzing data, writing papers, emailing with my colleagues, things like that. That's kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis. People ask me how I became an astronomer and how they can become an astronomer too. And if you're interested in astronomy, if you're interested in science, and physics, and math, then I encourage you to follow what you're interested in. Here's what I did. I went to secondary school in the US. I grew up in the US. And I took a lot of maths. I took a lot of science. I had a really great science teacher, Mr. Cannon, a physics teacher in secondary school. And so then I applied to university and I got in one university. And so I took a BSc program in physics, which in the US is 4 years. And I didn't know what I was going to do after that, but I applied to postgraduate programs and I got an MSc in astronomy and I got a PhD in astronomy. So you add that all up, that's 4 years in university and then 2 years and 3 years, that's 9 years of university with postgraduate, so it seems like a long time. But here's the thing, it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And for most of those years in postgraduate, then I got to actually be an astronomer for that time. I got to use telescopes, I got to use data, I got to use spacecraft and look at the data from spacecraft and write code and analyze the results and write papers and talk with other astronomers and so forth. And so I loved it. It was so much fun to be an astronomy student and studying astronomy. So what was great too is I didn't have to pay for it, and that's because education is so important to the U.S. government that most students who are pursuing their PhD and MSc in astronomy, most students get their education paid for by NASA and by the U.S. government, even students who come from other countries. And so if you are interested, I encourage you to look at educational opportunities at going to postgraduate programs abroad. There's many great universities across the world. Some are in the US, some are in the UK, in Germany, in Australia, in Singapore. There's so many great universities around the world. If you're interested in the programs in the US, I encourage you to either talk with me or talk with the US Embassy about universities available for you. Okay, so now I want to talk about the main thing I want to talk about, which is life in the universe. In other words, aliens. When people talk about aliens, they just mean life in the universe or extraterrestrial life, meaning life beyond the Earth. So people ask me, do I think that aliens exist? And I think a lot of people have different opinions on this. Many, if I poll people in the room, if I polled all of you in this room, some of you, if I said, raise your hand if you think aliens exist, I bet a lot of you would raise your hands. You do think there's life out there in the universe. I'm going to raise my hand. I think there's life out there in the universe. And let me tell you why. It's just a question of the math of it. So in our solar system, in our galaxy, there's 100 billion stars in our galaxy. There's 100 billion galaxies in the universe. That's a 1 with 11 zeros after it, multiplied by another 1 with 11 zeros after it. There's about maybe 10 planets around every star. You multiply those all together, that's 23 zeros, that's 10 to the 23rd different planets in the whole universe. And I think that there's probably life around at least one of those planets besides our own. I think it would be really strange if we have this huge number of planets and there's no life around any of them, because it's such a big number. There's that many planets throughout the galaxy, throughout the universe. Okay, well, next question then. The next question is, have we ever found aliens? And I've never found any aliens. I don't know if any of you have ever found any aliens, but I haven't. Even though I think there's aliens out there, I've never found any. So what's going on with that? No one has ever found any aliens. We've never found any life anywhere beyond Earth. No aliens on Mars, no bacteria, no asteroids, no radio signals that have been confirmed, nothing. And we keep looking. NASA is spending billions of dollars a year looking for life throughout the solar system in various parts. Other space agencies like ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, and JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, are also spending a lot of effort in looking for the origin and evolution of life and to look for life throughout the universe, but no one has ever found any life anywhere. And so what's going on? So this is maybe one of the biggest questions is, are we alone in the universe? And we can break that down. Is our solar system unique? Probably not. We found lots of other solar systems which are kind of like ours. We found lots of other planets, and some of those planets are probably a little bit like our own. They're not exactly equal to the Earth, but they're kind of a little bit Earth-like. And they're probably about the same temperature, and some of them are about the same size, and so forth. But then, is life on Earth unique? We keep looking for life on Earth, like on Earth, and we've never found that anywhere. So we have no idea if life on Earth is unique or not. So if you go back in time 1,000 years, we thought 1,000 years ago that the Earth was the center of the universe, and the sun, the moon, the planets were going around us, the moon was going around us, the sun was going around us, and the stars were going around us. We thought it was just us here, and everything else orbited around us. But over the course of the next 1,000 years, we became less and less special as the universe and our perception of the universe got bigger and bigger. The more we look, the larger the universe is. We're not actually at the center of the universe. Instead, we're very, very tiny. And our present view of the universe is that we occupy just a tiny, insignificant corner of the universe. Our region at Earth is not particularly special or unique. There's billions of other planets around billions of other stars in our galaxy, and many of them may be very similar to our own. So if we want to look for life, we want to answer this question of whether life exists in the universe. And if we want to look for life, we can't, there's 10 to the 23rd different stars. We can't look around every different star and every planet to find if there's life there. So we have to know where to look. Where should we look for life? So there's a shortcut. It's kind of so you can kind of think about this logically and kind of narrow down the possibilities for where you want to look for life. And how I define life is just being the complex chemistry. It's the most complex chemistry that we have anywhere. It's more complex than any other chemistry, any other physical process or plate tectonics or any other software algorithm, anything else. Life is the most complex chemistry that we've ever seen. So what do you do if you want to make complex chemistry? Well, three things I think that you can do. You can make complex chemistry if you have good ingredients. Good ingredients mean something that are cheap and easy to find, and you can get them anywhere, and they're good quality. And if you look at the different elements in the universe, there's lots of hydrogen in the universe. In fact, hydrogen is the most common thing in the whole universe. Hydrogen is a good thing if you want to make lots of chemistry with. Oxygen and carbon are the next most common elements that are easy to do chemistry with. And there's tons of them. What happens if you put oxygen and hydrogen together? That makes H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, right? So that makes H2O, that makes water. And so you take the two most common elements in the universe, hydrogen and oxygen, and you combine them, and what happens? You form water. Okay, interesting. So easy to find ingredients, that's good. If you want, you can do chemistry, and you can do chemistry in three different phases. You can do it in liquids, you can do it in gases, you can do it in solids. And if you're doing chemistry in solids, I mean solids like, here's a rock, and there's not much chemistry that happens in solid rocks. There's also not much chemistry that happens in gas because the molecules are so far apart that they don't interact with each other. But here's one place there is a lot of chemistry. If you look in water, and so if you look in water, there's lots of chemistry in this water. So if we have some juice here and we set it outside and we come back in a day, the juice is going to start to ferment. It's going to start to go bad, right? And that's chemistry happening right there. So liquids cause chemistry to happen quickly. So let's do some liquids. Let's get some hydrogen and some oxygen, some carbon in there. Let's do it at the right temperature, not too hot so that the molecules will break apart, not too cold so the molecules will freeze, but let's do it at the right temperature. And you do these all, you have these ingredients, you have liquids, you have the right temperature. What does that sound like? That sounds like liquid water. So the search for life is the search for liquid water. That's the shortcut that we're looking for. Instead of looking everywhere for life to see if it's there, we can instead just look in the places where we find liquid water, because those are the best places in the universe to find life. So here's three places in the universe, three places in the solar system that NASA is looking right now. So here's number one. Number one is the on Mars. We have the Mars Perseverance rover, and it's right there. Number two is on a moon of Jupiter called Europa, and we have an ocean there that we're looking for life in, or we will be. And number three is the Dragonfly mission, and it's going to Titan, which is the moon of Saturn. And so we're interested in looking for the signs of life at Titan as well. So these are three missions. NASA has about 30 missions that are going throughout the solar system. You can see the rest of the missions on that slide right there. But these are the three missions which NASA is working on right now, which are most targeted toward looking for things like what is the origin of life and is there life elsewhere in the solar system. So I'm going to talk about each of these. So here we've got Mars. Now, this is an interesting picture of Mars. This is taken with the Hubble Space Telescope. And it's really great here because what you can see is not just Mars, but you see Mars's atmosphere as well. You can see all the fuzzy, clouds above the atmosphere. That's water. That's water that you're looking at right there, because a lot of those clouds have water in them. It's kind of vapor-ish, in the atmosphere, but that's water. Also, you can see on the right-hand side, that's Mars' polar cap, or the top is Mars' polar cap, and that's frozen water to some extent in one of the polar caps too. And so there's water all over Mars. Now, there's not water on the surface. There's not oceans on the surface. But if you go back in time, 3 billion years ago, there were oceans on the surface of Mars. And so this is a picture here that you can see in the middle there. And that's where there used to be oceans on Mars. And you can see it looks kind of like Rajasthan. It looks like where there used to be, it's a big valley, and there used to be water flowing through it, and it kind of flooded, and everything got wet, and then it dried out, and they formed these rivers and so forth. Now, we don't see any rivers on Mars now, but they left the valleys behind that they carved. So it looks like the desert now, but it's a desert where there used to be water going in it. Mars used to have all these oceans and lakes. They probably evaporated off to space because Mars is a little bit different than the Earth. It doesn't retain the atmosphere quite as well. So all the water is gone from Mars, except for a little bit of the polar caps and a little bit in the atmosphere. So Mars is dry and dead right now. But the question is, could Mars support life in the past? And maybe we could find fossils of ancient bacteria on Mars. And so there's a picture there in the upper right. That's a picture of a meteorite, which has actually come from Mars. That's a real meteorite, and it's come from Mars. So there was an asteroid that hit Mars and kicked this meteorite off, and it landed on the surface of Mars. And if you break apart that asteroid or that meteorite, then there's some evidence that maybe what we have seen inside of that is fossilized bacteria. So it's not bacteria which is alive now; it's bacteria which is dead. But in green there, magnified a lot, is that bacteria. Now that's we think now that probably what that bacteria is probably not a bacteria. It's probably just a crystal, and there's actually no life in that rock. But that was what the thinking was, and that made a lot of interest in looking for life on Mars. So one of the things to follow up on that is we have the Mars rovers. We've sent up 5 different Mars rovers to the surface of Mars. The Curiosity and Perseverance rovers are the ones that are driving around there right now. They're exploring Mars' surface, and every day they're looking for signs of past life and habitability. Habitability means, could there be life there? And is it a nice warm environment for life? And so these rovers, they have chemistry experiments, they have rocks, they have hammers, they have drills, they have cameras, they have all sorts of things like this to explore the surface of Mars. This one here is the Mars Perseverance rover. It launched in the middle of the COVID pandemic in July 2020 from Cape Canaveral, Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It got to Mars about 9 months later, and it's almost 1 ton of equipment and cameras and wheels and gears to drive around on the surface of Mars. Now, again, this does not have any people on it, because to have people is extremely difficult and expensive. But what it does have is people driving it at NASA at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. And so every day, the scientists and engineers in California at the JPL, they basically use joysticks, and they use cameras, and they use computers to drive the Mars rover, tell it where to go, and basically use it as a remote geologist to do their studies remotely, to study Mars and to see what the history of Mars' surface is, what the origin of life bearing chemicals might be on Mars, and things like that. The Mars rover's been cruising for well over 1,000 days on the surface of Mars. We measure them in sols, which is a Mars day, which is a little bit different than an Earth day. It's driven well over 20 kilometers. You can see a plot and a map of where it's driven there. We landed it in this lake, or it's an ancient lake. Now it's not a lake anymore because there's no water in it. It's called a crater. It's called Jezero Crater. And so we're cruising through the different areas of that crater. Now, a lake is a great place to land if you're a Mars rover, because if you think about a lake, like I was out at Udavalave last year in eastern Sri Lanka, and it's got a big lake bed there, and then it's pretty windy, and so there's all sorts of things that get blown into that lake and never come back. And so there's dust that gets blown in, there's rocks that get blown in, there's leaves that get blown in, there's grass that gets blown in, and everything gets blown into that lake. And so if you walk around the middle of that lake, it's kind of mucky. There's all this stuff down there, right? Well, that's kind of, bad if you're looking to, go fishing, but it's great if you're looking to study the history of what that area is, because it means if you just pull up a little bit of that muck, there's a lot of different stuff in there, and you can study the history of the area by just studying the what's in the bottom of that lake. So here on the surface of Mars, then you can study you can go into that lake, and you can go into Jezero crater, and you can study the history of Mars by looking at the surface, by looking at all of the things which are deep inside the crater, and you can look at all of the rocks and all the history in that crater. And so this is what the Mars rover is doing. It is driving up through the surface, and every day it's getting higher and higher, and it's looking at the history of the rocks buried in its history through the last 4 billion years of Mars's history. And it's finding things like this. This is just what it might find on a common day. This looks like a mud crack. In fact, it's a mud crack like you might see if you went to Udavalave or Yala yourself. And it just looks like a piece of mud, which is, it rained and then it dried out in the sun. But this is a piece of mud that dried out 3 billion years ago, and hasn't stayed essentially fossilized since then. Okay, so that's place number one. Second place to go in the search for life is to Europa. Europa is a moon of Jupiter, and it's one of the most interesting places in the solar system. Jupiter has about 50 moons, but Europa is one of the biggest moons of Jupiter. And so what we can see here on Jupiter on Europa is it's made of ice. And in fact, it's made of ice, and we look at it and there's icebergs floating around on the surface on Europa. And these icebergs are basically very similar to like icebergs that you might see floating around the North Pole on the Earth. And right now the Europa, the ocean is kind of frozen on Europa, but we know that below that surface there's a liquid ocean, because we know these icebergs used to be moving. So that's kind of what it looks like. So we're interested not in the icebergs, but we're interested in what's below the icebergs, the ocean down there. And so this is a cross section of what Europa might look like today, where you have ice on top, just like on the North Polar cap of the Earth. But then below that ice, there's water, and there's warm water, and it's been warm for the whole age of the solar system for billions of years. And if you go up to the North Pole, if you go below the ice, who knows what's up there. There's whales and sharks and octopuses and so forth. And so maybe on Europa, there's whales and sharks and octopuses swimming around in that ocean as well. Now, maybe there's nothing at all. We don't know. But what we do know is it's been a warm, wet ocean for 4 billion years up there, and we don't know what's there, and we want to go up there to explore it, to learn what's actually there. And so we're doing it. We have a mission. It's called the Europa Clipper, and we're building it right now. In fact, it just about a month ago, it got on a plane and it flew out to Kennedy Space Center in Florida, Cape Canaveral. And so it's getting ready to launch in about 6 weeks. It's actually going to launch on a rocket from Florida and start heading toward Jupiter. It takes about 5 years to get to Jupiter, and it's going to explore. It's going to orbit Jupiter and then go past Europa itself and study Europa. So you can see that here's the spacecraft. The big black things there, those are the solar cells. There's a solar panel here, solar panel here. This whole thing is huge. It's maybe close to 30 meters across, because there's a lot of solar energy that you need to capture to operate the spacecraft. And so it's super duper exciting. You can see Jupiter orbiting behind it there, and then our spacecraft is going past Europa right there. So we're not going to land on the surface, but what we are going to do is study the surface up close, maybe to be able to land in the future. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3 is Titan. Titan is a moon of Saturn. If you've seen Saturn in a telescope, maybe some of you have. Titan is also visible in a telescope, and it's a bright object right next to Saturn. And Titan is maybe the most interesting of all the moons in the solar system. because it's very similar to the Earth. It has lakes, it has dunes, it has mountains, valleys, rainstorms, organic chemistry, a thick atmosphere, all the stuff the Earth has. And this atmosphere, in fact, is so thick that it makes it very easy to fly an airplane or a balloon or a glider or things like that on the surface of Titan. It's very cold. This is one difference with Earth, is it's very cold, and so all the water is actually frozen. And there is a liquid there, but it's ethane and methane. And so it's kind of like you go up to Titan, it's kind of like a petrol spill up on Titan, because there's ethane and methane all over the place. So it's different than the Earth, and any life there wouldn't be based on water, but it might be based on a different chemistry. But it's one of the most interesting places in the solar system. So we're working on it. We're working on going up there. We have a mission called the Dragonfly mission, and it's going to launch in 2028. It's going to go up to Titan, and it's a drone. It's an octocopter. And so when it gets to Titan, it's going to use its parachute, descend into the surface. The propellers are going to come out and fly around. And so it's going to land on the surface, study the surface, and then take off and land and study somewhere else. Fly around, study someplace else. Fly around and study someplace else. And so it's going to spend months and months studying the surface of Titan from the ground and from the air in order to look to see if Titan has life or has the sorts of chemistry that might make life possible. So these are our top 3 places to look in the solar system. Now, there's other places that you could look for life, but they're a long way away. For instance, the closest star to us, Proxima Centauri, is about 4 light years away. 4 light years away, that's about 50,000 years that it would take at the fastest spacecraft that we have. 50,000 years to go there, 50,000 years to go back. So it's about 1 lakh years to get to look for life, even on the closest star. So we can see, we can't really visit these other stars. What we can do is we can use telescopes like Hubble Space Telescope, like James Webb Space Telescope, to study them up close. We can also study things on Earth, because strangely, if we study things on Earth, that can actually tell us about life on other planets as well. And so here's a crater. This is an impact crater caused by when an asteroid hit Maharashtra, India, outside of Bombay. And it hit about 5 lakh years ago, and into basalt, and it made a big impact crater there. And you can go there, you can see this crater, and it turns out that the chemistry that's happening in this crater is pretty similar to the chemistry which is happening on Mars, because it's the same kind of rock. So by studying this crater in India, you can actually study life, how life and how chemistry might evolve on Mars as well. Cool that we can actually come up with this spacecraft, come up with the idea of it, put it on a rocket, build it, get it to Mars, get it to landing on Mars, and then it's been that was in 2012. This is 12 years later. That spacecraft rover has been driving around the surface of Mars every single day since then, and it's still working great. So it's remarkable. So let's say that you do get up to Mars, and let's say you do find some life. What does that tell you? Where did that life come from, and how is that life that you find at Mars, how is it related to life on Earth, or is it not? And so there's kind of 2 different options that we have, 2 different possibilities. If we find life on Mars, how did that life get there? Here's the first possibility. The first possibility is that life on Mars, life on Earth, you build it from scratch. And so you start off with the elements, atoms, you build molecules from that. You go from molecules into organic molecules, which are bigger. You go from organics into amino acids, you go from amino acids into DNA, you go from DNA into life, and you just kind of get bigger and bigger, more complex every step. There's another possibility that you could have. So some of these steps are very easy, some of these steps are very hard, like atoms into molecules, that's easy. Amino acids into DNA, that's very hard. But it's possible that life evolved separately. Maybe life exists in 1,000 different places, and every place it evolved separately, all by itself. So all those 1,000 different life forms would be completely different on 1,000 different planets. But there's another possibility, and the other possibility is that you brought in life from somewhere else. And so the Earth gets hit by about 40 tons of material every day. And so this is not just a rock, but this is an asteroid. This is a meteorite which came from space. It was part of an asteroid. It broke off. It came from space. It landed, in this case, in the deserts of Morocco, and it landed there. And some farmers there picked it up. And so I don't think that there's any bacteria on this. but I can't be sure. And if the Earth is hit by 40 tons of material every day, maybe some of that material is from another planet that has life on it already. Maybe that's bacteria that comes along with these asteroids and with these meteorites when they land on Earth. And so maybe when we find life on another planet, maybe that life has also come here through the method by which life can be transferred from one planet to the next planet to the next planet to the next planet, called panspermia. And so we don't know if this is how it happens. So life might form separately on different planets. Life might travel from one planet to another, two completely different methods, and we don't know which one is right. So just to end here, in hundreds of years, we've come so far in our search to answer some of the big questions. The biggest one being, are we alone? We know that the solar system isn't alone. We know that the Earth isn't alone. We know there's planets and solar systems pretty similar to ours out there. But what we don't know is whether life is unique or not, because we've never found life. So we're going to keep searching. I hope that all of you will help in that search and come along with it. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry, for having a very interesting and very fashionable talk. Actually, as usual, I feel like we all just swimming through the universe to find in the life because of the your images and showing the Mars and the Jupiter's